This is Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur with your host, Lynn Freest. Lynn will share ideas and expert advice from people that are walking in your shoes and living their encore careers, where they want and at the pace they want. You'll start a company of one with confidence and knowledge to live a fulfilled life of freedom and ease. Lynn is a coach and leadership consultant whose mission is to show senior leaders and experts how to start something refreshing and new after a full career in the corporate environment.
Welcome to this episode of Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur. Thanks for listening. Well, with an encore career, the rewards are better than a cold beer on a hot day. And you can be creating value in the world beyond just winning that next pickleball game. You can work when you want, where you want, and you can do the work you love. Just like me, you can live the dream. So if you're ready to get started today, please contact me at lynn@lynnfreest.com. This is episode 188, and it's about creating space and productivity with Daniel Sih. Daniel's from a long ways away from my place. He's from Tasmania, but he has a passion to help busy people make space in the digital age. He helps individuals and teams improve their productivity, mastering email, organizing to-do lists, and achieving their priorities. And he's written a book called Spacemaker, How to Unplug, Unwind, and Think Clearly in the Digital Age. So some of the things we'll talk about with Daniel are how he developed his business of teaching productivity, what led him to create the material that's in his book, Spacemaker, why you need the skill of resetting in life, and why this idea of space is important in every stage of life. And finally, why tomorrow's leaders will need to train their brains for focus and not be distracted by tech every few minutes. Well, welcome, Daniel. I appreciate you being on the show with us, and we want to get started right away, and I'd really be interested what's some of the things you're excited about working on right now?
So many interesting projects that I'm working on. So I just finished my first TEDx talk last week, and that was a big project, and it was really exciting. And it was good to be on the red carpet, the little circle dot, and try to memorize all my lines. So that was my last project, and I'm excited about what might come out of that when it goes online in a few weeks, and how to really try to launch a bit more of my keynote speaking career as a result of it around Australia particularly. So that's one thing. The other thing is I've started a productivity masterclass. So it's last year when I was launching a few books, I just felt like I was asking a lot from people, in the sense of I was asking people to write reviews and asking them to share my book. And I was just like, I've just been asking a lot. And I wanted to just have a bit more of an investment in a few people. And so it's just happened. So I now have two groups of 6 high caliber leaders who I'm meeting with each fortnight online and going through a 6-month program of helping them be more productive. So that's really exciting to be able to have deeper relationships with a few people who are really switched on and hungry. And so that's new. I haven't quite worked out all the content yet.
And that's something we learn as we go in these cases. And I'm sure you'll respond to what they come up with. It'll be interesting you might be surprised.
Well, I think the beauty about group coaching as opposed to individual coaching is the aim is to facilitate learning. And yes, I'll give some of my ideas, but everyone has ideas about what makes you productive, and they'll have ideas and experiences I simply don't have. Some of them lead companies which are far larger than I've led. And so it'll be great to learn from each other in the process.
Yeah, I firmly believe in the power of peer learning, and whether it be peer coaching or however you describe it, because I've been involved in several different groups in my time, and you just learn as much from each other as you do actually from the host in some cases. Why don't we go ahead and you can talk about a little of your journey to becoming the author of Spacemaker, as well as a TEDx speaker. What led you to this spot in life?
Yeah, a whole lot of good fortune and luck and some accidents, I think, along the way. So I started my career as a physiotherapist, and I'm in Australia. You can hear my accent. I live in Tasmania, which is a long way away from where you live, really the opposite side of the world. But yes, I started as a physiotherapist, physical therapist, I think, in the States, and did that for a decade, and then moved into health management, ended up leading a fairly large group of services where I am in health. Then I moved to project management, and then I had a major career shift, actually, and that was largely around a few things. Partly, I nearly burnt out. It was that kind of early 30s with kids and too much too much activity, and I became breathless, and a whole lot of symptoms came on where I really needed to stop and slow down. And that was a big transition. And I also felt at the same time I wanted to put more time into something that I really cared about. And I was volunteering a lot in my church at the time. And so I moved into ministry at the same time as doing physiotherapy management. And then I accidentally started a side hustle because I was frustrated at how badly people used email. And so I created a course called Email Ninja, which was about how to get your inbox to zero if you get a lot of emails. So anyway, if you fast forward 10 years, I did ministry for a while and that side hustle just kept growing until it became a full-blown headache. And it's called Spacemaker, Spacemakers is my company about how to make space to think and rest and plan and live differently by shifting the way you work. And so it began with Email Ninja and then List Assassin and then Priority Samurai. And then I had a full-blown productivity consulting business. And eventually that ended up being the majority of what I do, including some books and a few other things.
Sure. I'd like to hear more about Spacemaker because our audience is, while they may be contemplating getting out of corporate life, probably one of the things they've all yearned to do is how do we make more space? They may now have the space, but then you got to decide what to do with that space. So I'd like to hear more about what you do in Spacemaker.
Yeah. So the irony, I like what Richard Bach says. He says, I teach best what I most need to learn. And I'm an entrepreneur. I'm type A. I love what I do for work. I love what I do in my community. I love my family, my land. And so there's not much space in my life. And I've wrestled with space, honestly, for the last 20 years. But I think because of that, I've come to appreciate just how important it is to have margin and space in our life. And by that, a space to think deeply or contemplatively, to reflect on your inner life and know who you are and why you do what you do and what your strengths are. I'm a strengths coach as well, and where you're heading. A space to be able to plan and actually really think strategically and to plan your own life as well as the people you lead. Space to just work differently and live differently. So think about how you work. And also space to just breathe and have fun and be with family and people who matter. So I think, like you said, space is now one of the rarest commodities in our Western world. And I don't think that's going to change. I think there's heaps of information. There's lots of opportunities for many of us. We don't have space. And what I've come to the conclusion is that space is now a critical productivity skill for everyone, whether you're in the corporate career or whether you're transitioning into a solo career. And yet it won't happen by accident. The only way we make space in our life is if we are truly intentional in understanding how to firstly reflect on our relationship with the technical world, the online world, and the space we don't have because of the way we spend so much time online, but also to look at our inner life and the drives that we have and why we do what we do. And then just to create enough margin as a habit in our life so we can think and rest and be with people we love. And that leads to really fantastic careers as opposed to just doing the next thing because it's the next thing and following what everyone else is telling you to do. It takes a bit of bravery to make space and live your own life rather than someone else's life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I have one of my teachers and mentors. He talks about how entrepreneurs get started. And the first step he gave us on that was, okay, I want you to start with planning your time off. He says, because as an entrepreneur, if you don't plan your time off, there will never be any. So I really resonate with what you're saying there, that even in our next chapter of life, this is important. And then also people that I'm speaking with that are leaving a corporate career of achievement, they're used to achieving. And I'm just going to continue achieving as I go into my next. When in fact, I think it's still relevant that they got to step back and say, how do we make space in this stuff?
I think it's deeply relevant and more relevant than ever, actually, especially in those transitions. So I wrote a chapter in my book, Spacemaker, about what I call set and reset. So it is based on work from Terry Walling and who else? Dr. Robert Clinton and others, but it's just my made-up version of that. That imagine your life as a series of, lines, a bit like a wave. And you have periods of what I call set, which is the top, the peak, and reset, which is the dip at the bottom. And obviously that can happen in different periods. So set is when a career or a job or a relationship or a place where you know you need to achieve something. And then the types of thinking and productivity habits you need to do in that space is just to get it done. I need to speak on 100 podcasts. I need to hit this bottom line. I need to achieve this project or build this team. And so therefore it's boom, boom. Every day you wake up and you try to progress something towards that goal and to keep the activities going. Now you're still thinking, but you're thinking at a level of how might I achieve this meeting? How might I achieve this conversation or get this particular client over the line? Does that make sense? So that's
Absolutely.
set. But in reset, it's completely different in the sense of reset is when you have a big life transition. So it may be that there's a global pandemic and we know how many people transition there. Obviously, it could be with death or divorce or children or obviously retirement or reaching that age where you have this deep inner desire to contribute in a different way and yet it needs to look different than what it did in the season before. And in those seasons of reset, that's a real skill. Now, you might call it a transition, but I believe you still need to think and you need to be active, but it's a very different type of activity. It's the kind of activity that allows you to put your hands open and not know and to sit in that space of wonder and bewilderment and confusion. I like how Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning? Yeah, he says that we detect our life's meaning rather than find it, rather than achieve it. And you can only detect something if you're still enough and quiet enough where your hands are open enough and your heart is still enough to actually reflect and detect what comes next, what's happening in you, how you're changing, how the world is changing, and what opportunities might come that you don't expect. And you won't see that if you're continuing to use the patterns of set. You need to be actively journaling, talking to a coach, walking on the beach, reading books, feeling uncomfortable and wrestling with your personal demons and imagining your strengths and thinking about the world that could be. None of that happens without space. And yet with space, it's incredible what can happen in your life.
Well, I love that illustration you give there because in my work, some of the people are saying in the future, we may have what's a 60 plus year adult life from 20 to 80 or 90. And so even people who are in their 50s, they'll probably go through a series of things even after they leave the corporate life or even after 50. So this whole idea, yes, there'll be those sets and resets, probably a couple of them, even in their quote retirement years, because we're just living healthier and longer. So there's more opportunity there, but you have to be intentional about it.
Absolutely. And look, from what I've read of the stages of life, and there's Carl Jung started by talking about different stages of life, the early years and the younger years, etc. But I think there's almost like a third stage of life we have now compared to what we used to, like you said, because 40 and 50 used to be an old man when even a few hundred years ago. And so literally when you became a grandparent, you were heading towards genuinely the end of your life. And towards the very end of your life, now it might be your 80s or 90s even, then we typically need to really dive into the inner journey and find peace and joy in the simple things and experience thankfulness that we can get up and see the sunrise. The type of inner journey becomes a deeply important part of our spiritual life. But then in the 40s and 50s, now it's 60s, 70s, then it's the focusing and the achieving a few really meaningful things and not doing so much that becomes important. So I suppose what I'm saying is from a productivity perspective, productivity looks different for different stages of life. And there are lots and lots of those transitions, even, definitely from 50, 60, 70, 80, just continue. So we need more space. Basically, I'm agreeing with you with a lot more words. Sorry, Lynn.
No worries.
You can cut that part out and we'll just say, I agree with Lynn.
No worries. I appreciate your perspective because, again, as you see people talk about the issue, enlightens me also. So thank you. Now, I know you have a lot of what your book talks about is how do we change or how do we moderate our relationship with technology? What are some of the key things you would suggest to people who are in that busy corporate rabbit or hamster wheel, as it were?
Yeah. And actually what I would say it's probably for everyone, but it's harder on that hamster wheel. So what we're seeing is that while we all lack space, like I don't have to convince people that we're lacking space for the things that I'm talking about. But what is the diagnosis? What is the problem? And it's obviously a wicked problem with many different factors, both global as well as relational, corporate, technological. But a big factor in our lack of space is our over-reliance on technology and how much we're allowing low-value digital activity to shape the texture of our lives. Whether that be low-value email, checking the email, like in corporate life, the average American checks emails every 6 minutes. That's astounding. And we check Slack even more if we have Slack. So that hasn't changed the email problem. So we are filling our mind with constant distractions and notifications. Doesn't matter if you're younger or older. A 21-year-old average American male has spent 10,000 hours of online gaming by the time they're 21, which is like the magic number for self-mastery of anything. And yet what we're mastering is Fortnite. And I see the same thing in the older generation, except you just get distracted with maybe Facebook or online Sudoku or other activities which are meaningful to a point, but not if they are taking up the majority of time and stopping you from deeply meaningful activities like pursuing a new craft or starting a new career or building really deep in relationships or mentoring the next generation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And so it begins by reflecting on how much technology is impacting our space, what drives us to actually spend so much time online, whether that be TV, gaming, social media, Netflix, Instagram, like just internet scrolling, to have an honest audit of how much technology does use up the extra margin in our life and whether the habits we have technologically align with our greater values. And that's probably the kicker, because it's not that I'm saying that these things are bad, but honestly, if you're unwell and unfit and all you need is an extra 5 hours to exercise to really enjoy the next 10 years and you're spending 20 hours on Netflix a week, then that's a fairly easy mathematical equation. Pull out one series and get 10 years of your life back for exercise. But it doesn't work that way because we're humans and we're emotional and we're doing this for particular reasons, which are often emotionally driven, they're addictively driven. So I suppose, how do we reflect on our relationship with the tech world and then have some really smart strategies to unplug in order to invest in deeply important things that will make our life richer and more meaningful? So that's really what the book's about.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that. I've been interested in a gentleman by the name of PJ Fogg that wrote the book Tiny Habits. And he talks about this whole idea of how can you create very small steps that nudge you away from or into whatever you want to do, as opposed to trying to stop doing something else. You start creating those little moments that help nudging you towards the positive you want in life. I can appreciate
Definitely.
what you're saying there.
Definitely. And my big idea really is that what's changed in the last 5 years, and I imagine it's the same with your audience, it's definitely true for anyone who's working in the corporate world, is that if you are not intentional about unplugging from technology, you might almost always be online. That's a very new situation for humanity, and it will only increase with AI. So what it means is our normative experience of life is online, reaching for your phone very first thing in the morning and putting it down very last thing at night. And all the way through the week, pretty much having technology shape your day. And because that is now a normative human condition, then to be productive, we need to intentionally make space. So those habits have to be about each year, how might we carve out space? I know you and I talked about booking holidays in advance and making sure that you preempt the gaps or spaces in your year so you actually have a vacation. So that would be an annual habit of making space, or weekly habits of making space. For me, it's a digital Sabbath or a digital day off, having at least one day a week where you are either tech-free or significantly less on your tech in order to invest deeply in things that are restful and relational, or lots of daily habits. Just having a pause at the start and end of each day without beginning with tech by charging your phone outside of your bedroom, having a tech-free meal, as a sacrosanct thing to connect with family or people in your life, maybe just going for a walk every day without a phone, just to think and to pay attention to the world around you. So what I'm saying is, if you can create habits of space making away from tech, then you can unlock a whole lot of other valuable things, but it needs to be intentional.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a good friend and teacher who notices these things, and he tries to find space, and that's how he teaches. But he said he was surprised when he was working with a group of young people one time. And he said, I notice some of you are paying attention to the conversation, but some of you are on the phones. And the young person said, yeah, well, in our group, if 3 people are paying attention to the person speaking, the rest of us can check our phones. And he said, okay, that's odd, but I understand what you're trying to do.
That's like a hive mind, like Ender's Game, or I don't know, a beehive. That as long as one of the collective consciousness is learning, then the rest of us must be absorbing. I don't know if it helps with the exams at the end of the year so much, but
no, that was But I get it. People, maybe not intentionally, but unintentionally create some of these new norms. And I read recently an article that they talked about, I think it was about AI and stuff. And they said, as new technology comes, we don't have any guardrails. In fact, what they said was, when automobiles were first introduced, it was pretty much chaos in the big cities because people drove anywhere they wanted. There was no rules to what happened. And so they said, eventually we got some rules to the road for driving on automobiles. And they said, that's probably going to have to happen with some of the tech. And we're still in a stage where it's a free-for-all out there. And we haven't created powerful norms that can think through this.
So I haven't heard of that analogy with cars. It's a really apt analogy. And I really think that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not anti-tech at all. Like you and I are talking from literally the other side of the world in real time. My job is basically on tech. Most of my clients are outside of where I live because I live in a tiny place. And I'm so grateful for the opportunities of being able to speak and train and write because of the online world. So it's not so much that tech is the problem, but it really is oversaturating our lives post-COVID. It caused us to isolate from each other for a good reason, but now it's keeping us socially isolated. And the research is really saying if you overuse technology as opposed to using it just right, the productive sweet spot of productivity, then your relationships often suffer because relationships have to be in person to be truly meaningful from a life happiness perspective. Our mental health often suffers with more anxiety and loneliness and depression because too much time online is actually bad for our mental health. And our productivity suffers because if you train your brain to be fractured and wired and require lots of constant small amounts of notifications and attention, you simply can't lead the life you want to live and you simply can't create. Now, the tech leaders of tomorrow will have brains that can focus, not brains that are totally wired to be distracted every 5 minutes. And so all of it falls apart if we don't have some, like you said, some guardrails or road rules. But obviously, I'm promoting self-generated road rules at this stage. There will need to be, particularly with AI, some global road rules, but I'm not sure how that will play out.
Yeah, I believe there was he was a media expert or guru, and he was even before the internet, but he said, we don't suffer from information overload. We actually suffer from filter failure. He said, our senses are pulling in thousands of data points from all around us every day, and our brains would explode if we thought we were going to pay attention to all of them. But the brain filters that out. But now with technology, our brains have to get some new ways to filter and set aside the technology so that we can, again, do meaningful and thoughtful work.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the ideas? I was looking at your table of contents for your book, and you started with a digital detox and a data think. Maybe you could speak a little more about those two things.
Yeah, I might give you a quick overview just before I get to the practical bit, because the book has 3 sections. One's the paradigm, one's the principles, and then the practices, which is what you alluded to. So because in many ways, the idea of saying to someone, oh, it's pretty simple, just make space, get your phone, turn it off on a Saturday and don't look at it all day. It's not hard in theory, right? It's, put your phone away and, I don't know, play board games and go for walks and chainsaw in the backyard, do whatever you need to do for your gardening. I don't know. So in principle, turning off your phone and unplugging to make space, it's really simple. And that's the practices. But it's not at all simple because technology and the meaning of technology and the relationship we have with technology and how we express our loves and longings through technology, it's deeply embedded into our humanity, let alone the addictive cycle that's caused in our brain when we practice the internet 9.5 hours a day, which is the average American. Okay, so imagine practicing the piano 9.4 hours a day, what that would do to your brain from a neuroplastic perspective. we're practicing the internet 9.4 hours a day at a minimum. Okay. And so it's changing us from the inside out. So what I'm trying to say is if you don't start with the paradigm of technology and reflect on why we find technology so important for everything and where that relationship is healthy and where it's codependent, then you'll never be able to do the last bit, which is, why not try digital detox and why not try a day off? Why not have some practices outside of the screen? Does that make sense? And so I have to start with the mind shift because I know that the habits don't stick unless there's a deep conviction that actually life is better if we can get a better balance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mindset is always your starting point in my eyes.
Great. And so with that in mind, yes, then there are some really particular habits that I lay out. And it's really a schedule of or a menu of ideas that have worked for my life and leaders I coach. And I shape them around what are some annual patterns. So I already mentioned one, which was the booking your holidays before you book your rest. And when you do have holidays or vacation, turn off, delete email from your phone and have some strategies to actually disconnect from your business or from your corporate career so that you can actually rest, which again is not as simple as it sounds, but it's important to be able to have deep rest in order to then work well throughout the year. But there are other habits. The digital detox you mentioned is one where I head away for 3 to 5 days every year and I hire a place. I put my phone in my car. It's there if I need it, like for an emergency, aliens, I don't know, come to Earth and I need to phone my mum. But I try to have a disconnected 5 days if I can every year. And I read lots of books. I think a lot about where I've been, where I am now, think about my relationships. I've got kids, so we have lots of times together as well. I'm very thankful that my wife often gives me a few days by myself and then we do stuff together as a family. And so that helps me as an introvert to really think deeply and plan my year. But that digital detox allows me to just reboot. It's really hard at first and then it's beautiful. And then I go back into the world of tech and I have to relearn it week after week. So kind of annual habits. The weekly habit, as I mentioned, is to really think about what it means to rest deeply and to have a pattern where one day a week you actually have a day where you rest. But the challenge for us is imagine we're gardeners or we're manual workers or we're agrarian workers. Well, then to rest would, if you're a farmer and you're outdoors all day with animals and using physical labor to achieve things, then it makes sense that on the weekend you'd play Fortnite and watch lots of TV and relax, right? But because the opposite for what you do for work. But for me, my work is typing and swiping, communicating online, writing things on a screen and processing information constantly through email and other communication channels. I'm always on the internet for work, literally from like when I wake up to when I go to bed. I'm often interacting with clients around the world. And so therefore for my day off, if I want a day where I'm not working, I came to the conclusion that I have to do something that's the opposite of what I do for work. And the challenge is the mind or the brain from a neuroplasticity perspective can't tell the difference between Outlook and Instagram. We might say, hey, this is my recreation and this is my rest. But if an alien was looking from outer space, they would basically say this person never turns off their rectangle god. And it's exactly the same from an internet practice perspective. And so I came to the conclusion that if we're going to rest deeply, knowing that the mind is what makes us tired as much as our body, then I have to have a day where I'm disconnecting from my work. And the only way I can do that is by shaping my tech habits very differently and unplugging. So it's not about turning off your tech just to be purist. It's about having a day where you don't work. And so there's a whole lot of ideas in the book and a lot of explanations about why we might unplug at different patterns, but also how to do it. Because even that idea, I've given you the concept, but I haven't shown you how might you actually organize a day without your tech if you were to do it once a week, which is more complex than you think.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I have a good friend and teacher who, again, he teaches online. He teaches people around the world, those kinds of things. But he was saying the other day that he'll go and he'll load the Instagram app on his phone and make a post, which he'll do inspirational or whatever it is. Then he'll literally delete Instagram again from his phone so that he has to reload it again to make his next post and the following day or whatever. And I said, I understand what you're doing. It sounds extreme and a lot of work, but for him, it makes sense. So,
I wish I'm laughing because it's ingenious, but the apps, like an app like Instagram is deeply addictive, designed to be addictive. And there really isn't a way to use it without engaging in the addictive nature and the qualities of it. So I can understand why they're doing what they do. For me, I've deliberately pulled off of pretty much all social media except for LinkedIn, which I use very heavily because I'm a business owner. But I put LinkedIn on my phone, and LinkedIn is the most boring, less addictive of all the social media. It's the boring app for old people like me, right? And yet I found it addictive. Honestly, I found that when it was on my phone, I started to check this app like 10, 12, 15 times a day. I'm like, this is LinkedIn. So I had to take that off of my phone and just use it on my desktop. So, I mean, I don't know if that says something about my personality or about the fact that the brain just really longs for stimulation and social credibility. And it can be such a distraction from the stuff that actually matters.
I've often read that the algorithms are there on social media to either catch your attention or outrage you or any number of things. And all those algorithms are there to put things in front of you so that, one, you'll buy something, but two, that they'll keep you scrolling, I guess it were.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Yeah. And so it's about making space to control. To be intentional. Be intentional about what you use. Be intentional about eliminating as much from your digital life as you possibly can. And then be intentional to make sure that you're developing really meaningful habits that align with your values and your bigger goals so that you're saying a whole lot of small no's, and a lot of them will be digital, in order to say yes to something that is of great purpose and of value. And I think that has deep value for anyone wanting to transition and move from one part of their life, which might have been their corporate career, into a very different part of their life. Because it's not just about finding a job, as I'm sure you and your listeners know, it's about becoming a different person. And the different person needs the space to change their habits and their mindsets and to realign their identity so that their patterns shape and reinforce a different type of person they want to be for the next season of life. And none of that happens without reflecting on your tech habits and creating the margin you need.
Yeah, the encourage people, and I've been involved with other groups like the Modern Elder Academy. They talk about you're moving from a success mindset to a significance mindset. You're getting away from the activity mindset of the corporate world to whether, hey, where can I make the biggest contribution or add the most value in life? And that, as you said, that takes reflection to do that. Whereas it's easy to fall into the Netflix trap or easy to fall into any number of things and find yourself not really doing what you hope to do, quite frankly.
Look, definitely. The two biggest transitions from a career, I mean, I'm younger, obviously. I'm only in my mid-40s, but I've had the two transitions I've had, which have been really significant, have been being a physiotherapist to a pastor, and then from being a pastor to an entrepreneur. And they've been really big identity shifts and have taken a lot of risk financially. But each time I think the biggest risk was in the middle of the dip where I'd made the decision, as painful as that decision had been, kind of left one life and I was leading into the next, but I hadn't quite experienced the benefits. I was just experiencing the pain of it. And the pain of, from pastoring was really hard, but I haven't actually got an income for being an entrepreneur and I'm trying to find the meaning in it where pastoring was so meaningful or vice versa, etc. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that during those transitions, space becomes so important and the ability to just stay the course and to keep learning and to trust that as uncomfortable and as painful as that dip feels, as long as it's been well thought out before you entered it, then stay the course and keep having the space to feel, to process, to reflect, and to trust that you'll end up on the other side with a meaningful career transition.
No, I agree. And I've often heard it described as the messy middle in a transition. And in fact, this Modern Elder Academy uses the metaphor of the caterpillar to the butterfly. In between there is the chrysalis period where literally you're just soup before you transform into the butterflies. But again, people who are in the corporate life, they're used to achievement all the time. And yet there's going to be a period of time there where you're just in the soup, as it were, before you start making that climb out into your new identity.
Wow. And so here's a strategy, because if you are used to that and you're an achiever, or someone who needs to tick off a lot of stuff from their lists, that is who I am. So when I'm in reset or I'm in the soup, I like that. I'll use that. When I'm in the soup, I still tick off lots from my list, but I just make sure I'm disciplined to recognize the season I'm in. So I'll tick off that I spent 2 hours walking without my phone and wrote in my journal my feelings. tick, I've achieved something. I'll tick off that I played board games with my kids and that I spent an hour in the garden, tick. Or I'll tick that actually I had a full day without email, or I achieved something. So I'm actually measuring my achievement of making space,
right,
rather than my achievement of keeping pace.
Mm-hmm.
And because I know that it's the space that will eventually transform the soup into that new thing. And if I don't do that, I'll simply just keep going in circles
Mm-hmm.
and never quite entering that new stage. But I can't break my personality type, which is a task-oriented, achieving type guy who likes ticking off stuff. And I know others will be very different, but if that's your personality, you can still enter, reset, and make space and be contemplative. You just need to measure yourself against other things.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I had one gentleman I interviewed on the podcast that he was an entrepreneur to begin with, and he built a company and it got fairly big and it was successful. And he said, well, I don't want to do this. So he sold it. And then he says, I'm going to do something different. Guess what? He said, I built another company. And he said, so he said he was on his third try now. He says, I'm intentionally trying to not build a company and still do something useful.
I did something similar. I was basically a strategic consultant. I was doing strategic planning as 80% of my business. And then COVID hit and I lost all my clients because no one wants to do a 3-year plan in the beginning of a pandemic. And no one should ever do 3-year plans. I've been saying that for years, but it made it obvious. And so I really felt compelled to actually make space. And so I deliberately didn't try to find another job and I didn't try to change my career and make my business online and all this stuff. I gave it a number of months and then I broke my leg actually. So riding a bike. And so I was in bed for a while. And then a few months later, I found I had a nonprofit that I started with 2 employees and it was all from online and it had nothing to do with my business. I was helping start groups where people would support each other online during a pandemic and it became an organization. And I think that was beautiful. But again, it came out of this space, that little adventurous journey, which actually transformed, I'd say thousands of lives all around the world for a season. That came out of not chasing the next thing when I was in need of income. And it just, It happened because of the space. And so again, starting a business as an accident is fun.
Yeah. And I think there's I can't remember who the quote is from, but it's from an old author that, when you commit to something, the universe can move with you. And sometimes we think it's all about us, but actually, if we keep moving in the right direction, it's surprising how much things come to us.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be my situation. Yeah.
Daniel, I really appreciate all the insights and wisdom, and we will certainly include in our show notes links to your website, your book, and those kinds of things. Any other thoughts on how people can work with you or what to do as far as that you'd like to work with them?
Well, look, I certainly run coaching for people around the world in terms of productivity and how to become more productive. But no, pick up my books and read some of my blog posts. There's a lot there about some of my painful transitions in life and what I learned and some of the joyful ones. But yeah, hopefully the idea of making a bit of space in the clutter of life can stick with you and the idea of reflecting on your relationship with the online world and what it might look like to habituate a bit of space in the clutter. And to do it deliberately rather than just accidentally. Yeah, if you walk away with that, then I'm really grateful.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate everything. And you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Lynn. I appreciate it.
So just a quick recap of our questions. We talked about how he developed his business of teaching productivity, what led him to create the book, Spacemaker. What do you mean by the resetting in life? Why space is important in every stage of life, and why tomorrow's leader will need to train their brains for focus and not be distracted by tech every few minutes. And we'll have Daniel's contact information and a link to his book in the show notes. Again, with an encore career, the rewards are great, and you can be creating more value in the world beyond just winning that next pickleball game. You can work when you want, where you want, and you can do the work you love. So if you're ready to get started today, please contact me at lynn@lynnfrias.com or head over to my website, lynnfrias.com, maybe listen to a few podcasts and get on the email list. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.